Welcome to the Driving Change Podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Well, welcome back to the Driving Change Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Bloomfield. And unless you're driving in your car right now, I want you just to close your eyes for a second. Now, can you imagine if you were going blind, knew that you were going to go blind at some point from the time you were a young child, and you actually did in your early 20s? See, what most people were preparing for the adventure of life, today's guest, Chad Foster, was actually watching the world that he grew up with fade to black. Now, if you think about that in your life, what that would have looked like, what kind of barriers, what kind of obstacles that might have put in your path, how your life might be different had that happened to you. But what I'm excited about of having Chad on today is that actually didn't stop him. It only motivated him more. Now, it didn't at first. We got to uncover some junk in the brain trunk to get you through there with Chad. But he became the first blind person to graduate from Harvard Business School leadership program. He went on into corporate America, climbed the ladder, successful finance, sales executive, learned how to code blind, which is going to be amazing. He's been in leadership rooms and boardrooms all over the globe in the software company. And it's through his life story, his ambition, his drive, and his passion for people to see that they can actually become more than their obstacles tell them, or that the world tells them that they can be. He's given probably hundreds of millions of people now the ability to earn a living around the world. He actually helped create the first CRM, or customer relationship software, for visually impaired. He's become a trailblazer out there today. He's been featured all over the place in media. He does keynote speaking all around the world. Usually it's just Chad and his seeing eye dog, his assistant's dog. I can't wait to learn about that as well. And his story will absolutely inspire you to think about your life in a different lens. So Chad, welcome to the Driving Change Podcast. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity to have conversations. Thanks for the great intro.
So now, I'm an old country boy. Roots down in Kentucky. Grew up in Ohio. You're a country boy. Good old boy from Tennessee.
That's right.
People want to know your origin story. So it's always fascinating for us to learn about the guest origin stories, especially when it's as riveting and wrought with obstacles as yours was. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up. What was it like where you grew up in Tennessee, and then the story of everything you learned about your blindness, your family, your parents, all that. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, grew up in Tennessee. Was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and growing up, I lived a somewhat normal childhood for a little while. My parents started noticing at about 3 years old that I was having problems seeing in really dimly lit rooms. I was sometimes bumping into things and tripping over things, and they noticed at night that I couldn't see real well at night either. And so they took me to Duke University when I was a kid, and it was there at Duke that the doctors diagnosed me with an inherited retinal eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. Now, this is interesting because neither of my parents had any symptoms. Both of them are completely symptom-free. And then I later found out that I have a form of retinitis pigmentosa. I got tested genetically later on in life when that technology was available. Obviously, it wasn't available when I was 3 years old. So they were sort of making educated guesses. Turns out they were spot on with their educated guess. But what they didn't know is I have this mutated gene. It's a particular kind of retinitis pigmentosa that's autosomal recessive, which means I have to have two bad copies of the same gene to be symptomatic, which explains why neither of my parents and nobody else in my family were symptomatic. So it was sort of this hidden family eye disease that nobody else had. So we didn't even know it existed in the family until I had it. And even with both my parents being carriers for it, there was still only a 25% chance that I would end up with it. So the doctors told my parents, as they started to get ready to go home, that they should put me in a special school for the blind as they left. And at 3 years old, my parents said instead of doing that, they were going to sign me up for soccer. So they decided, to not really hold me to a different standard, to, in fact, maybe even ask a little bit more of me. My dad was was pretty tough. He gave a lot of tough love, which I needed. Not the least of which is because my dad was raised on a farm and he was a little old school as it relates to those sorts of things, but also thought that boys needed a little bit of extra discipline, which is probably true. And the fact that I was going blind, or they thought I would go blind at some point, they thought that I might have a tougher road than most. It turned out to be a really great observation, because as I did get older, I started learning the limitations of my eyesight. I was bouncing into things literally just to learn what I couldn't see, because the interesting thing is you don't know what you cannot see when you can't see it. And so the way that you learn that something is there is by bumping into it. So, sometimes this was, an obstacle. Maybe it was like a downspout that I didn't see at night. One time I remember at dusk, I was on my grandparents' farm and I was running down the gravel driveway at night and didn't see this water truck parked in the driveway, and hit my head across this big metal pipe on the back of a water truck. Had to get rushed to the hospital. In fact, I went to the hospital so much that they started questioning both me and my parents in separate rooms and wondering if they were beating me or not. And the truth is, they weren't beating me. They were, I was just learning the limitations of my eyesight. And that was sort of this lifelong experiment that I've been in of living life outside of my comfort zone. And so that was really uncomfortable physically. And then as I got older, in high school, not being able to drive at night. I could drive during the day, but not being able to drive at night, that was socially uncomfortable. And then not being able to play certain sports at night that I wanted to play. Like I enjoyed playing basketball and football and soccer, and I wrestled and lifted weights and all those things when I was in high school, but couldn't see well enough to play basketball in the gym, or couldn't see well enough to play football at night under the lights of a high school football stadium. And so all those things were socially uncomfortable and made me really feel like, I wasn't getting a fair shake, sort of felt like a victim, was really taking what I had for granted for a while. And then in college, things really started to take a turn for the worse, as in I completely lost what remaining vision I had. And at 21 years old, I had 3 years into my pre-med major because I wanted to go into the medical field to help other people. And then I went blind in college, couldn't see to complete my anatomy and physiology classes. And at that point, I flushed 3 years of university work down the drain, and honestly wasn't even sure how I was going to be able to help myself, and sort of fell into this spiral, if you will, of rumination and self-pity and this victim mindset that really plagued me for quite some time.
So Chad, did you think growing up that, I love that your parents didn't treat you any different than anybody else, than your brother or anybody else. They just put you out there and said, look, we want him to be resilient. Now they might have known, but they had probably no idea they were building a resilient machine, right? That you're going to end up teaching resilience around the world. But that when you were growing up, did you just have a mindset that maybe, because I think if I'm not mistaken with this condition, it hits people differently in different parts of their life. And some people can go a long time and still have a lot of their vision. So did you kind of maybe have that optimistic view as a kid that, hey, this isn't really going to happen?
Oh yeah, I was totally delusional. I was like, not me. I remember I went to see one of the leading specialists in the United States when I was 14 years old. And he remarked how most people who have this eye condition couldn't imagine riding jet skis or a motorcycle. When you're doing all those things, you can drive a car and you play sports. And I remember leaving that meeting, and my mom, she was crying. She was so happy. And this was, 34 years ago. I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember leaving that meeting like, looks like I beat it. It's not me, And so I really had this feeling of there was a sense that I was going to be able to outrun it, and it wouldn't catch up with me.
Well, and I think in a lot of ways, I look back and I always talk about the stories of the people in our lives when we're young, and sometimes the decisions they make on our behalf, we don't even realize the ripple effect, the impact it has. So many parents in today's culture, clearly, and I'm going to probably stereotype here, but they would have put you in bubble wrap, right? They would have put you in school for the blind at 5, put you in bubble wrap, and you'd have been,
exactly,
and you wouldn't have been who you are today, and so in the world would have been worse off for it.
Yeah, well, a lot of parents think they're raising kids, but they're not. They're raising adults.
Yeah.
They often get caught up in this myopia that if I can just, protect them from everything that life is going to throw at them instead of equipping them for everything that life is going to throw at them, then I can save them. But the hard truth is, I have 2 kids. I have a 15-year-old and an 8-year-old. And I know I'm not going to be around forever. I hope not. I hope I go before them. Right. And it's up to me to make sure that they're equipped to take on whatever life throws at them. And so I tend to think of it as I'm not raising kids. I'm raising adults who need to be successful, happy, productive members of society. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job as a parent.
Wow, that's great example. Good way to tie that together. So then you get to college. Now, I was always curious, and I was reading your book, and you did such a great job of describing kind of that moment. Was this something? Obviously, it was deteriorating a little bit more. But was there that moment when it just went dark, or was it really more of a slow fade?
It was a slow fade, but there was definitely a moment when I was reading one of my books. It was my British literature assignment that I was reading. I was 21 years old. And I remember, normally this assignment, it's like a 30-minute reading assignment. It wasn't that significant. I had spent over 2 hours reading this assignment, and I kept having to take breaks. I couldn't see the words on the page, and these tiny little floating dots called floaters kept getting in the way, and I just couldn't see around them. So I rested my eyes. I got this really bright lamp to make the light on the page create more contrast. But no matter what I did, I couldn't see around these little tiny floaters that kept getting in the way. And that's when I realized that everything that I'd been hearing and thinking up until this point, this was it. This was the moment darkness was knocking on my door. I couldn't run, I couldn't pretend, I couldn't hide anymore. Everything that I'd been hearing and dreading my whole life was now knocking at the door. And that was a really hard moment for me. I sat around, it took me some time. It was a pretty emotional moment, just sitting there with the realization at 21 years old that I knew I'd never see another sunset. I'd never see my future wife and never see my future children if I was lucky enough to have them. And that was a pretty tough moment to realize that everything that I had hoped and dreamed that I'd be when I grew up would probably not come to fruition. Because we ask kids all the time, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And guess what? None of those kids say they want to be a blind person.
Never makes the top of the list, does it?
No, it's never in the top 5. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe it's in the top 15, but it's not the thing that you aspire to be. And so all my hopes and dreams for myself faded. I thought I was going to be X, and it turned out like, I don't know. I had no idea where to begin. I couldn't even envision what success or happiness or any of that looked like in this new dark reality that was forced upon me. And so that was a pretty tough time.
Now, we're in the valley here, right? We're at the pit. So in the valley there, and you're in the pit, this is happening. And, the emotional side of this for you, how did it impact you? Did your behavior change? Did you, to what depth of pity party did you start throwing yourself in college that really was the bottom for you?
Oh, yeah, there was definitely a big pity party going. I mean, I was in the throes of it. I was dealing with it in non-productive ways. I wasn't really taking my college, my academic work, all that seriously. Was doing too much partying and not enough looking towards the future because I wasn't sure what my future held. Part of me was wondering, well, maybe should I just drop out of college and go see what little bit of the world I still can see while I can before it's totally gone? Or should I stay here and stay committed and try and push through it? And I had all these mixed feelings, and there was a lot of bitterness and frustration and anger that were just kept. They kept bubbling up. I couldn't do much about it. So I channeled it the best way that I knew how. Part of that was some ridiculous workouts in the gym. I've always been a gym rat. So I would, between a combination of that and, partying and being non-productive and not really taking school seriously, I'd say I dealt with it in a variety of ways. I don't think it was the best way of dealing with it, but I had to come to grips with what I was going through. And that was really tough. And I think what ended up getting me over the hump, it's a combination of things. My cousin gave me some straight talk one time. He came in from Houston. I always looked up to my older cousin. He was probably about 25, 26 at the time. And he came in there and we're hanging out, and we went out to the Strip in Knoxville. And that's where things happen for college football season. So we went down there, we watched a game, went out and had a beer or two afterwards. And I remember we went back to the house where I was living, and he comes out to the house. He's like, "Hey, Chad, come on, let's come out in the driveway. I want to talk to you." And we're all sitting there talking. And he just looks over to me. He says, "Hey, your buddies in there?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "All those guys are going to be losers. And if you don't stop hanging around with those guys, you're going to be a loser too."
Wow.
He's like, you need to get it together." And it wasn't anything that, my brother hadn't told me or my dad hadn't told me or any of that, but it coming from him, it meant something different. I don't know why, but it really hit home. And I didn't instantly change at that point. I didn't completely do a 180 and pivot, but I couldn't get it out of my head either. And then I think the real, that combined with my experience when I went to Leader Dogs for the Blind kind of changed how I looked at everything. So I went to get my first guide dog at 23 years old. Still kind of woe is me. Showed up on their campus there in Michigan with this woe is me mentality, very much the victim mentality. And I was there, and I'll never forget, I walk in and I'm feeling bad for myself and all this. And then there are people in my class who were also getting a seeing eye dog, and some of them had mental impairments. So they were mentally impaired and blind. And some of them were on dialysis. They had to go to dialysis every week because they had diabetes on top of being blind. And then there were these girls there. I'll never forget these girls, just incredible. They were deaf and blind. And they're getting a dog to be independent. And, we had to just talk with an interpreter who would sign into their hands. And that was the only way that they could communicate. And so they were facing unimaginable challenges on a level that I couldn't even begin to contemplate. Yeah, imagine, if you will, I grab a dog's harness handle and walk down the street in a busy highway, busy, road, whatever. I can hear what's going on. They couldn't hear or see what's going on, but they're getting a dog so that they could be independent. And the living courage exuded by these brave souls just left me ashamed of my pathetic attitude. It completely flipped my mindset almost instantly on the spot, because I had been looking at everything that I had lacked in my life, and living with these people for 26 days flipped that entire perspective on its ear, because I realized that, I'd had all my hearing. I'd had all my mental and kidney function. I had 20 years of good, usable eyesight. It wasn't perfect, but it was a whole lot more than some people get. And so I started to focus on the things that I had instead of the things that I didn't have. And I learned that, a lot of times people think happiness, is some feeling that you get, it's some emotion that you experience, and I just don't think that's the case. I think it's a decision that you make every single day when you wake up. You either choose how you're going to look at things, or you allow random circumstances to affect your happiness. And so I learned at that experience at Leader Dogs for the Blind that, it's not the happiness that leads to gratitude. It's the gratitude that leads to happiness.
Oh, wow.
So if you can really choose a perspective, anchor yourself in gratitude, pay attention to the things that you have, and have that mindfulness towards the things that we all very naturally take for granted as humans, it can shift your happiness level all based on your perspective and your gratitude. And so that's why at home with our kids, every night actually, we all do a gratitude session. I make the kids and wife, we all do it at home. We have to say 3 unique things that we're thankful for that day, because my belief is that if we can bring the conscious attention to the very things that we take for granted every single day, then we can start to shift our set point for happiness and gratitude.
Well, that's amazing. And I love it. And we talk a lot about around the neuroscience research of the fact that the brain looks like, as far as we can tell from the research, that the brain can't be in a position of gratitude and in a position of anxiety at the same time. And so it literally changes the neurochemistry of the brain. So the things you're doing, you're helping literally rewire your kids' neural pathways by having them do that every night. So that's amazing.
Wow. I love hearing that. Can I record that and take that back to my wife?
You absolutely can. Tell her you know what you're talking about. You talked to an applied neuroscience researcher. He told you that you're an amazing dad, and this is the best thing you can be doing for your kids.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Love it. It's great to hear. Thank you for that.
So this idea, this is where I think the jumping off point becomes, it's like this, it's the hero's journey, right? It's the narrative, right? You hit the pit, you turn the corner, you started to have what we all end up having to find in our life is perspective. And for you, maybe it took a couple of different episodes of perspective, but the big one coming at the at the what'd you call the place where the dogs were?
Leader dogs. Yeah.
Leader dogs. So leader dogs.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone who's visually impaired knows that because they've probably gone through there that have had a service dog. So you have this amazing point of perspective, and then all of a sudden something shifts in you.
Yep.
And at that point, you moved yourself from this negative fixed mindset to this positive growth mindset, almost in what seemed to be almost overnight. What happened next? Like where did you take that newfound perspective to the next level?
Gosh, doors started flying open for me, Jeff. I came back to university. I completely shedded the victim attitude that I had been plagued with, and got back to university. Had to relearn how to learn because I was a visual learner, which turns out it's not all that useful when you're blind.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew, right? But I turns out I was a better blind student than I was sighted student. And it's because it forced me, instead of just memorizing as quickly as I could information, I actually had to digest and metabolize information. Now, my mom entered the scene at this point of the story, and she literally read every single college business books to audio cassette for me. And when somebody goes out of themselves, moves beyond themselves, and does something like that for you, it inspires you, and it inspired me to really not let her down. I read the book twice. I recorded the lectures, listened to each lecture twice, had a note taker that the university gave me. I ended up making straight A's from that point forward in the dean's list for the first time. So I graduated, got a job from a top consulting firm in Atlanta, moved to Atlanta to take that job, and acted like I was excited. You know, everybody would ask me if I'm excited, and the truth that I hid from them and maybe from myself is that I was terrified because I had never lived in Atlanta. I'd always lived in Knoxville. Family and friends were close by. I was moving to Atlanta to take on this new highly technical consulting job where I was expected to write code. I had to travel every week to a new city, new hotel, new client site. Had to learn the bus and the train system in Atlanta without being able to see. Had to find my way around the downtown area. Had to figure out how I was going to get my groceries. We couldn't order groceries online back then. And obviously, I'm not a very good driver. There was no delivery service back then. So I had to figure out how to do all of that with just having one free hand to carry my stuff. Even riding the bus, you know, I had a dog, a big German Shepherd leading me around that I'd just gotten a year or so earlier. So I'd only been blind for about a year or so.
Right.
And I had all these new challenges. How was I going to get my groceries, my laundry, get around, like learn how to get through the airport, learn how to get to all these new hotels and client sites. And it was pretty scary. And everybody would ask me, my parents included, are you excited? And of course I told them, yeah, I'm excited, because I couldn't tell them that I was scared.
Right.
Because if I told them that I was scared, then they would start to fear for me. And I think what got me over the hump as I was thinking about that, because I did contemplate briefly just, you know, turning around and not going through with it, because it was very intimidating as a totally blind person doing all these things. But I did what I now have a name for it. I call it the future you exercise. And so what can future you live with? And future me, looking at my situation, future me had two choices. I could either make a decision to go back to Knoxville and not go through with it and never know what could have been in my life, or to step into the fear, to step into the uncertainty, to step into the anxiety and embrace it and see what happened. And I decided that in the long arc of life, the scarier thing for me was not knowing what could be, what was possible. And so I did it scared, as most of us do when we're faced with something like that. We have two options: to run away from it or do it scared. And so I opted for the latter. I decided to do it scared. It went fine. It went okay. Like, I figured out how to get from point A to point B, learned the bus and the train system without being able to see, was able to figure out how to write code on my computer to do my job, found a system for working around all those different things with enough determination and enough patience.
So let's pause for a second there, because I want to go further into that. First of all, one of your next books has to be "Do It Scared." That's got to be a title for one of your next books. I want to back up for just a second, because one of the things I found consistent with everyone's story, especially stories like yours, but I think it applies to anyone in life, is we don't ever do it alone. No one ever does it alone. There's always people that come alongside of us that are instrumental at getting us over the hump. And I want to underscore something you said. I want to clarify it first.
Yeah.
And for the listener, this is back before the age of audiobooks. And I don't think you were reading Braille yet. Maybe you were, but
No, I don't know Braille.
did you say your mom literally read word for word, page for page, all the textbooks that you were taking in business classes and committed them to cassette tapes for you to listen to?
Every single one.
That's incredible. Like she must have, because she worked too, right? This wasn't like she was just sitting at home doing this for fun.
She worked. My dad would leave and she'd be reading. He'd come home and she'd be reading. Her voice was hoarse. She was reading nonstop. I mean, pages, hundreds of pages, thousands of pages.
Wow.
It's no doubt in my mind that she read my textbooks more carefully than a lot of my classmates. And so that's when the university decided to give me the Accomplished Alumni Award. Back in, was it 2014? They gave her an honorary one as well. It's the least they could do because I think she read all of the business books more carefully than half
I was
my
just going to
classmates.
say, I hope they gave her some type of a honorary degree for that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was.
And you weren't reading Braille yet, or you were at that point?
No, I don't know Braille because I went blind in my 20s. And so reading Braille, I knew was going to take some time commitment. And after I went blind, I realized there were more pressing things for me than to learn Braille. I needed to, first of all, figure out how to make money. I needed to get like gainful employment. And so that brought me to the computer. And so I needed to learn how to use a computer. And so I really immersed myself in that. And then that led to me learning how to write code, to engineer my software, my computer to do what I needed it to do so that I could do my job more effectively, which ended up turning into a business that I started, and all kinds of different directions ended up coming out of that. But I opted to not learn how to read Braille because I had so many things that I had to learn after going blind. And we live in the age of digital technology where there are options. You can get information from a computer. So the options are out there. And if you know how to access them through audio output, then Braille would be nice to have for sure, but it wasn't crucial for me to get gainful employment. And so that was my focal point to begin with.
So then you decide to go ahead and I love your idea there, the way that you expressed that the future you did the future you exercise and determined that the fear of not knowing what you could have been was so much greater than taking the risk and moving to Atlanta and learning everything new there on how to function and live independently in a world that you knew nothing about. So how many weeks or months did it take you to where you started to feel less anxiety when you left your apartment or condo or house or whatever it was in the city there, and where you started to feel like you got some semblance of, predictability, right, in your environment? What did that look like for you? Because all of us go through that, by the way, in new environments, but when you're blind, it has to be exacerbated to the nth degree at what that feels like to be able to get to the place where you feel less anxiety because of predictability. What was that like, that adjustment?
I'm not sure that you ever get to where I'm not sure that it's less anxiety. Well, okay, it is less anxiety. I'm not sure that it's more predictability. I think it's more comfort in the unpredictability.
Wow.
And so it's almost getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I call it's now one of my 5 pillars of resilience. It's the 4th one, get comfortable with discomfort. When I leave, I've got in September, I've got a bunch of events in September that I'm speaking at. I've probably never been to any of these places I'm going to. One of them is in Dubai. One of them's not long after that in Sao Paulo. These hotels, the only thing that's predictable in my life back then and right now is, back then I was going into the office more. So I would go into the office and there was that. But when I'm going to the airport now and then, who knows where it's going to land? I don't know where it's landing. I may not know the airport. I probably don't know the airport. I know Hartsville-Jackson Airport because it's my home airport. But what gate am I going out of?
Right.
It is literally the world's busiest airport.
I was going to say, your home airport is the busiest airport in the world, so no pressure there, right? I can fly through there.
Yeah, exactly. Just ease on into that, right? And then, where are you going? What's the hotel? Are you in the same hotel room? Are you in the same hotel? Are you even in the same city? So I don't know that I ever got anything that was predictable, but I think that actually became part of my superpower.
So you do this, Chad, without having an assistant with you? This is just you and your dog?
Yeah, just me and my dog.
What's your dog's name, by the way?
Current guide is Major.
Major. So you and Major are just traveling the world, expecting the unexpected, being comfortable with the being uncomfortable. You got no other personal assistants helping you along the way, the actual logistics. This is insane to me. It's crazy. I love it.
Well, so sometimes now my wife has started coming with me, but I've done it for many, many years without any help, and she won't go on all of them. She kind of cherry picks where she wants to go. She's like, "Oh, where are you speaking this week?" And if it's a cool location, she's like, "I'll go."
Yeah, is there a
and
beach?
If it doesn't sound cool to her, she's like, "No, I'll sit this one out. You go ahead."
My wife literally just asked me last week. She's like, "Hey, where are you going? When are you going back to Florida to speak?" We get me and my youngest daughter. Her and my youngest daughter want to go to the beach again. I'm like, "Oh, let me make sure I build it around your social calendar." That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
I had that. I did an event in Florida and then one in Texas, and she wanted to go to both those. It was ironic too because she didn't end up doing any shopping, but I was speaking at the Westin at the Galleria in Houston, and if you've been there, it's got a bunch of shopping and everything. As it turned out, we didn't have time to do a bunch of shopping. It was a little bit of a turn and burn when we got there, but yeah, she can tend to cherry pick, but certainly I've traveled by myself to China, to Singapore, to Japan, to Korea, to all over Europe, Spain, France, Italy, Germany, Luxembourg, the UK. You name it, really, all over North America, just me and my guide dog. And so I'm comfortable with that in the sense that I'm comfortable with the uncomfortable. I know that it probably won't be flawless. We'll probably make a wrong turn, but I've just sort of learned to embrace this sense of adventure when I leave the door. You know, when I exit the house, like, all right, it's probably not going to be perfect. We're probably going to make a few wrong turns, but it really is not going to matter in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
I have to go do this. I've proven to myself that I can figure it out, and it's just, you know, it's part of the adventure spirit that I think helps me get through it. But if I make too much out of it, like, oh, I've got to be on point and it's got to be flawless, and it's just too much pressure to make it something that it can never be, which is perfect.
Yeah, I love that. It has such application for all of us, regardless of whether we can see or not. Now, when did you get the idea to write? I know you've written a couple of different books, I believe, but Blind Ambition was the one that I was kind of drawn to. Like, when did you get the idea to write that?
Well, I had a successful corporate career, so just to lead up to it, I did some work at Anderson Consulting. I wrote some code, ended up joining a technology outsourcing company, led market intelligence there, then went into pricing strategy for large multi-billion-dollar commercial outsourcing deals. Then from there, shifted into the Fed IT space, led some large programs there, won billions of dollars in contracts, moved up the corporate ladder, went from a senior pricing analyst up to eventually a senior director over pricing strategy and solutions at a large international Fed IT company where we provided IT program mission services to all the civilian, defense, and intel agencies. And so my decisions and team's decisions led to over $45 billion in contracts. And I had just been given this Accomplished Alumni Award by the University of Tennessee. And my manager at the time comes to me and says, "Hey, Chad, you got a great story, man. Let me know if there's something that we can do to support you." And for some crazy reason, I was like, "Hey, Joe, maybe you guys should send me to Harvard, And he's like, I don't know if we can do that, but I'll try. And they ended up agreeing to do it, wrote a 6-figure check, sent me to Harvard. I became the first blind executive to attend this leadership program. And I was learning there from Bill George, who is the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, the world's largest medical supply company. And he's now an executive fellow there at Harvard, and he teaches what's called his True North leadership framework, and in particular, this was in the authentic leadership class. And you think when you go to Harvard, you're going to be learning about business cases and all these business metrics and stuff, and you do, and that's part of it. But this was a class that was more focused on how do we become more effective leaders, and it has a lot to do with finding our authentic leadership voice, which gets back to finding our purpose. And Bill talks a lot about how to discover your purpose based on your own life experiences. And a lot of my classmates were grappling with theirs when mine just kind of reached up and smacked me in the face. realized that I'd lived my whole life and never really tried to do anything with what I'd been through, going blind. I was always just focused on getting to my next goal. And people would tell me that I inspired them, but I wasn't trying to inspire anybody. I was just trying to hustle to get to my next goal.
Right.
So I never really took that seriously. And I realized, holy smokes, I think I'm probably going to be our graduating speaker. And so I came home in between modules, talked to my wife, was like, I think I need to learn how to give a talk. I have no idea.
Figure out how to speak.
Like, if I get elected, like, I'm going to look like an idiot. I got to figure out at least, how to do some of this. So she reluctantly supported me. I was like, okay. She's like, are you sure you've not even been elected? I found this speaker who could help me. It was going to cost me, some significant money to pay him and to fly there and to write a 12-minute talk for a speech I'd not even been nominated or elected to give. And it was just this gravitational pull. I just knew it was supposed to happen. So I did that, ended up being elected as a graduating speaker, nominated, elected. And obviously I did a really good job with it because I had prepared for it, being the type A person that I am, and just having the sense that it would come to fruition. But something happened that evening that I never did anticipate, and that is the way that it affected other people and me, I never really anticipated. And there was a guy I'll never forget who came up to me after my talk, and, he's like literally just like, he's bawling in my arms. Mm-hmm. And I found out later on that this particular gentleman had lost a daughter the year before to cancer.
Wow.
And something I'd said helped him. Now, I'm sure it didn't make the unimaginable loss go away, but in some way it helped. And I've never been this like soft and fuzzy person, but when you have that kind of experience and that kind of moment with a parent, it changes you. And that moment changed me forever, and it changed how I look at what I can do with my true north, as Bill George talks about it. That moment showed me how moments like that can make going blind worth it. And so now I know that I lost my vision, but I can help other people find theirs. This blindness could be a beautiful gift that came disguised in really ugly wrapping paper. And so now I speak. From that point forward, I started building a speaking business, took my 12-minute talk. Now I give hour and a half presentations all over the world. And that led to the idea of writing a book. And that's when Blind Ambition came about. Following that moment, came back and was talking with the then CEO of Red Hat, Jim Whitehurst, and was asking him, how did you find time to write a book? And he explained to me how he had help and put me in touch with his agent and team. And so one conversation led to another. Within 6 or 9 months, I had a book deal with HarperCollins. And now, Blind Ambition came out in 2021, which really complements a lot of what I talk about when I'm speaking, because at first I started speaking and then came the book, and obviously the keynote has continued to evolve, but it's very, very aligned in terms of messaging. And it's all about how to not be a victim of circumstances, how to shift your mindset and chase your goals and to pursue them with blind ambition.
This idea, man, this is such a good story, such a powerful story. And I also love your vulnerability, the willingness to say, look, I was out there just trying to figure out how to get to the next goal, because you'd become such a perseverance machine, right? You were an overcomer from the time you were 4, and you just kept following that path of proving to yourself and to the world that you could do the next thing. Yeah. And then boom, you get hit right in the face with the fact that your life story was meant for more than your accomplishments. You were starting to inspire other people to go from victim to visionary, to go from the lowest point in their life to seeing that there was hope on the other side, and that moves a person, right? That touches the human element inside of all of us.
It's very moving, and a lot of it, I got glimpses of that from my mom. When I was in college, and she was moving beyond herself to inspire me, and people I've had in my professional life who inspired me, and then to have that timing and that leadership and that lesson from Bill and what he talks about, and finding those crucibles in your life and turning those into pearls and helping other people, transforming those difficulties and experiencing that post-traumatic growth and giving new meaning to the challenges that you're facing. And that's exactly what happened. Now when I go and I speak to people and I hear the stories and I hear the impact, and it's so fulfilling. It's not even a job at this point. It's not work. It's not a job that I do or work that I do. It's a reason for being. It's a reason for being on the planet. It's a purpose. It's something that comes with this almost endless reservoir of energy because it's not a job. It's like, yeah, I get paid to do it, but that's not why I do it. I do it because of the impact I can have on other people and how good it feels to help somebody else overcome the challenges in their lives and turn their own obstacles into opportunities.
What would you say as we close here? What would you say to people that are listening that says, yeah, you know what, Jeff, Chad, this sounds great and I love it. But, I don't have that kind of story. I didn't, I wasn't going blind from the time I was 3 and went blind at 21. And, I don't have that. And even, I tell my story all the time, coming from the farm and overcoming cancer and being the first person, I keep telling people everybody's story matters. And don't think that what you think is insignificant isn't completely significant to somebody else. What advice would you give to people? You've been talking to people now by the hundreds of thousands around the world the last several years. What consistency have you heard that you have to continue to encourage other people with because they just get stuck in their own, my story doesn't really matter? But you know what I mean?
Well, I think the most important story for you is the story that you're telling yourself about you. And so if you're telling yourself that your story doesn't matter, then that will become true. But if you're telling yourself a better story about your story and about your circumstances and about your ability to navigate a situation, that can be true too. I sat around for some time just telling myself that I went blind because I've got terrible luck and woe is me. But then I learned to start telling myself better stories that I went blind because maybe I'm one of the few people on the planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome that and use it to help other people. Now, technically, both of those stories can be true,
right?
But one story paints me as a victim. But the second story, the better story, is a Jedi mind trick that transforms my disability into my strength. So every one of us will become our stories. The stories that you tell yourself about yourself are the single most important factor to determining your success, your happiness, and the meaning that you're attaching to your circumstances. You will become your stories. The biggest influence in your life is you. So make sure you choose your stories wisely.
Man, that is an amazing place to stop. I feel like we got to have you come back on because I'd love to unpack some of your frameworks around resilience and the things you talk about. But for now, let's close with sending people to where they can learn more about you, where they can get your book, where they can book you to speak, like all that. Where should we point people?
Let's go to chadefoster.com/driving change. We've got a special something for your guests there as well, but all the information can be found there. From there, they can find speaking videos, links to the book, social media handles, all those things. If they go to chadefoster.com/driving change.
That's awesome. And I would love to have you back on here and then we'll go into more depth maybe in part 2 if you're up for it. And let's keep in touch and keep a track of each other on this because what you're doing out there in the world, I want our audience to get more of. And I want the people that we influence to have more influence by people like you because I think you're making a huge difference in the world. And you're certainly driving a lot of change in the world for people with your story. So thank you, Chad, for what you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.